Good afternoon. It's Tuesday. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Pacific. Sorry, 10 a.m. Pacific. And welcome to Advancement Live. Advancement Live is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts, which are always free and accessible to you in our archives at higheredlive.com and on iTunes. Be part of our broadcast by tuning in live and sharing your insights and questions using the Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter. You can receive weekly updates with live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. I am your host, Andrew Gosen. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about partnerships between alumni affairs offices and alumni entrepreneurs. Working with alumni entrepreneurs presents both opportunities and challenges for an alumni affairs office. This is a subject that I've seen discussed a lot in moments moving between sessions at conferences or during informal networking times. But I think that working with vendors to be able to do more than advancement offices can do on their own is going to become an increasingly important part of what our work looks like over the next decade. And because of that, I think it's time that we start talking about this directly and shining a spotlight on this dynamic. And I'm incredibly grateful to both of today's guests for their willingness to ground this conversation in the example of the partnership between Switchboard and Reed College. And we're going to learn more about Switchboard in just a few moments. Before we dive in, however, I want to give a shout out to our Advancement Live sponsors, iModules and mStoner. iModules software is the leading constituent engagement management provider for educational institutions. iModules delivers an integrated online platform that transforms how institutions strengthen constituent relationships and achieve fundraising success. iModules, thank you for your support. We couldn't do this without you, and we would also like to say welcome to Troy Anderson, the new iModules CTO. Higher Ed Live is produced by mStoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. In June, mStoner is hosting an in-depth two-part webinar series focused on brand strategy. We're tweeting out a link right now where you can learn more and register. And now, let's get down to business. Let me start with a few observations that I hope won't be contentious. First, there is an increasing number of companies out there offering services to advancement offices. These range from online community platforms to CRM software to brand monitoring platforms for social media. Second, many of these companies offer services and/or tools and/or expertise that advancement offices are unlikely to develop internally. But as I alluded to earlier, I'm convinced that productive partnerships with the right vendors who are offering the right products is going to become increasingly central to our operations if we want to continue to serve our institutions effectively. Third, unsurprisingly, many of these companies either employ our alumni or they are actually startups that are headed by our alumni, and occasionally the inspiration for the startup to start with was the experience of an alumnus or an alumna who knows the alumni community really well and understands some of the needs and the priorities and the wants and the opportunities out there in these alumni communities if only we have the right tool to help make that possible. So all of these points relate to each other. And one of the main goals of this show is to flesh out the outlines of that relationship. Before we start doing so, however, I want to lay out the fact that there are two perspectives that we need to consider in order for this conversation to make sense and for there to be a productive partnership. From the perspective of the alumni office, most of us who are working in alumni offices are fully aware that partnerships with vendors will allow us to do some things that we simply will never be able to do ourselves. However, I think many of us know from firsthand experience that vendors sometimes overpromise and underdeliver, and managing vendor relationships can be complex, time-consuming, and draining. And there's an additional element of complexity involved if your vendor has alumni working for them and you're suddenly in a position of having a vendor-client relationship with somebody who you normally have an alma mater alumna or us relationship with. And that's simply an interesting complexity that I think it's worth talking about explicitly. From the perspective of the alumni entrepreneurs very often have a feel for the needs and the wants of the alumni body that is grounded in their own experience, and because of this, they're able to produce tools that actually address needs very directly and effectively. I think of examples of this, and I think about the way that Steve Rittler at Countermarch Systems is able to not only deliver mobile and web platforms, but because he's such a good volunteer for Lehigh, he understands both the needs of the alumni body as well as the business needs of the alumni office in a way that delivers tremendous value. I think of Brent Grinna and the work he's done with Evertrue, and there's a similar dynamic there. Many of his key insights and the value he delivers relate directly to his experience as a volunteer at both Brown and at Harvard Business School. So alumni entrepreneurs can develop companies and platforms that meet the needs of the alumni community and the alumni offices very effectively, and they very naturally want to partner with alumni affairs staff at their alma maters to make these products available to their fellow alumni. However, there are some moments where they fail to fully appreciate the operational and the political realities that shape what actually is possible at the alma mater. I still bear scars of a particular instance 3 or 4 years ago where we were presented with a platform that an alumnus was very passionate about that was great, except that adopting it would have required us to undo 3 years worth of work with our regional associations and with our volunteers, and it didn't seem to connect with him that that was something that was just never going to happen. Other times I think that alumni entrepreneurs don't fully appreciate the extent to which higher ed can actually be a terrible client for vendors. In general, I think we tend to be cheap, risk-averse, addicted to consensus, slow to act, and there are a whole other series of related problems that I likely will address on a future show. But let's stop having me talk and let's turn to our guests to dig into this particular juicy topic. Today's guests represent each of these perspectives, and we are going to examine the dynamic of this sort of relationship by asking our guests to talk about the partnership between Reed and Switchboard. First up is Mara Zepeda. Mara is the co-founder and CEO of Switchboard, which is a platform that engages students and alumni by enabling them to meet their needs and do things that matter to them. I love that articulation of the goal of the platform, and I would love to dig into that a little bit later when we get into our discussion. Switchboard started at Reed College while Mara was serving as a member of the alumni board, and its customers, in addition to Reed, include Portland State University, Willamette University, Oberlin College, and Catlin Gable Independent School. Prior to founding Switchboard with Sean Lerner, who is also a Reed alum, Mara worked in higher ed for 15 years, coordinating programs at Harvard University, Penn, and for Philadelphia area medical schools. She has served as a volunteer, board member, and consultant to foundations, neighborhood and arts educations, and countless other nonprofits. She holds a BA in Russian from Reed and an MS from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism with a focus on digital media. Mara, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew.
So let's start with basics. Tell us a little bit about Switchboard. What does the platform do, and where did the idea come from? And certainly feel free to screen share if you'd like to show us this on your desktop.
Yeah, I'd love to show your viewers that Switchboard. I'll just start my screen share now. So what you all are looking at is Reed's Switchboard, and essentially you can see that it's a series of posts, and there are only 2 types of categories on Switchboard: ask and offer. So people can ask for what they need and offer what they have to give. So sometimes people jokingly refer to Switchboard as a non-creepy Craigslist. I'll show you quickly how to post. So you can see it's incredibly simple. You simply click this button here, I have something to ask. These are the categories that we saw most effectively activated students and alumni. So they were asking for things like jobs and internships, advice, hosting, housing, goods, and then other. So everyone in the higher education community at Reed College can post and ask, or they can offer the same thing. So let's say your company is hiring and you're posting a job. Let's say you're willing to give advice, and so you're posting advice. So it's quite simple. And then as you can see, there are sample posts. So we can just look at one from yesterday, let's say, someone who's looking for housing in Washington, D.C. This is a current student. She's looking for a place to stay. If anyone has any ideas, please let her know. And in meeting Anais' need, it activates the community. Anais sees the value of her Reed College network, and it also kind of creates this atmosphere where people can have reunions anytime. as you can see, there's a comment from a grad of last year, who kind of provides some more context and information and suggestions for people that can help out in DC. So that's just a quick overview of Switchboard. It's very easy to post, to search and filter posts, and to post itself. So that's an overview of the platform. In terms of the idea for Switchboard, let me see if I can undo my screen share here.
There you go.
Great. Yeah, so in terms of the idea for Switchboard, as you mentioned, I've spent 15 years in higher education, and what I saw over and over again was there were all of these countless missed opportunities, and I think that the reason is pretty simple. It's because institutions tend to have a very narrow definition of engagement. So administrators spend so much time and effort extracting value for the institution, hoping that members will engage with the institution. And they weren't really seeing meaningful results. And so at Switchboard, we wanted to flip that equation and redefine engagement. And essentially what we wanted to ask was, what if the institution could demonstrate value to its members by connecting them with each other to meet their needs? You know, so you have current students looking for internships, alums in need of places to stay during a graduate school interview, older alums who are seeking to hire bright talent. And so if you can meet all of these needs from within the network and establish that cycle of generosity, then people would constantly have these renewed and refreshed experiences of engagement with the community. And so it would be so much more intuitive to give back when that annual fund call came.
Great. I love the concept, and I love the notion of letting the community define for itself what its needs are, and then position other members of the community to meet those needs without the institution necessarily having to serve as a bottleneck or a connective point in the middle there.
A human switchboard is what we say. But people like Mike have been human switchboards.
That makes so much sense. Okay, I like the name even more now. Fantastic. So a couple more details about how the platform works. Is there any supervision of what people can ask or what they can offer, or are you trusting the community to behave itself?
Yeah, we're trusting the community, and I have to say that in the history of Switchboard, I can only think of maybe one inappropriate post. So, you know, what we believe is that people are inclined to be good and generous and kind, and Switchboard is a very optimistic place. And so if you give people the freedom to be vulnerable and ask for what they need, or be generous and offer what they have to give, that kind of the best of, you know, our better angels come out in these instances and really create a platform of generosity and giving. And that's what we've seen time and time again with all of our customers, that it's really a very positive and optimistic place, and one that's built kind of out of love and not out of fear or pessimism.
Is the platform structured in such a way that you're depending on people to visit it on a daily basis, or is there some sort of push technology to let people know that there are asks that are out there that they might possibly want to respond to?
Yeah, great question. In fact, I'll demo a feature really quick. That's another thing we were hearing, is that you know, people didn't want to continue to monitor Facebook pages and groups, and they wanted an easy way for information that they cared about to be delivered directly to their inbox. But likewise, what we were hearing was that they were really tired of being overwhelmed by Google groups and listservs. So I'll show you a feature briefly on Switchboard. You can indicate in the alert system that you would like to be alerted anytime there's an offer for a job in San Francisco, and so that way you're getting you're getting content that matters so specifically to you, and you aren't being overwhelmed and kind of experiencing burnout of communication from your alma mater, because the content you're getting is so specific to what your needs are and what you're looking for. So this is one of the most powerful features of Switchboard. You know, there are alums out there that say, look, I just want to know anytime a student asks for advice in finance, and they can simply set that alert, and that will be delivered directly to their inbox, and they don't have to worry about monitoring social media, which we were hearing was exhausting, you know.
And then does all of this activity archive in such a way that a person could go in there and they could find past inquiries about finance, for instance, in such a way that you're not depending on somebody to respond directly every time? You might be able to find it in a past response?
Absolutely. That's another feature that we heard people wanted. You know, communities are essentially a brain trust of information. And so the more that we kind of answer these one-off requests and make these one-off contacts, you don't end up building a community resource and a community brain trust. So for example, you know, let's say I want to see all offers for advice. I simply click these filters and I'm able to surface immediately all offers for advice. So there are 219 offers for advice. We can see that Emma is happy to talk to people about law school. Michael, class of 1980, is happy to help with jobs and internships. Someone is happy to speak to people who are interested in traveling to Argentina. And so Switchboard essentially leverages and surfaces this brain trust of information, so Mike doesn't have to have those one-off conversations where he says, oh, of course you should speak to Aria. She went to Peru. Now that the community member is able to find that information themselves.
And something else I really like about this is that it not only lets people ask for what they actually need, but it positions people to volunteer on behalf of their fellow alums by offering whatever it is they actually have to give.
Exactly.
And I do think that sitting in an advancement office, I mean, our goal is to try to unlock value for the institution, right? So it makes sense that we're going to prioritize asking people to volunteer for alumni communities, asking people to come to events, and asking people to support the institution financially. And those are all probably the three things we ought to be focusing our attention on. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other important things alumni can offer to each other that can actually make a dramatic and tangible difference in the lives of an individual fellow alum. And I love the fact that Switchboard lets those sorts of things surface as well.
And I think you're so spot on about that, Andrew. And I think what we're hearing is actually all of the activities that you just described are in fact one big matrix. And so it isn't that giving of time and spirit and giving financially and having an experience where you connect with alum is it all separated, but in fact it's an integrated whole. So I'll give you an example from my own life. This is Maureen and Conrad, who volunteered to let people stay at their homes and host people. And I went to visit them, and I was at CASE actually last year in San Francisco, and I stayed with Maureen and Conrad, and that experience was so fantastic for me. I was able to connect with an alum that I had never met before. We developed a very friendly relationship. I was so grateful for their hospitality, and clearly I saved money in getting a hotel room in downtown San Francisco. So as a result, I donated in Maureen and Conrad's name to Reed, and so you were able to close that loop of financial giving, which is so important to everyone in advancement. And then moreover, I was able to report this success and kind of let everyone know just how wonderful that experience was, and I kind of told that story. And then what I think is even so great, and what's really been inspiring to me, is that Emmeline, class of 2011, she would go on to stay with Maureen and Conrad, and she would go on to post a success story. And so I'm certain that when Emmeline receives a call from the annual fund, throughout her life as an alumna of Reed, she will have this very positive and personal and intimate experience of being hosted by her community, and that will most definitely reflect in her future giving patterns.
Great. I think that's going to be really interesting to sort of watch the data over time and sort of assess how impactful that sort of interaction is. So I want to get to Mike in just a second, but two more questions to help sort of establish the context here. So you and your co-founder came up with this idea while both of you were serving on the Reed Alumni Board, is that correct?
I was just serving on the Alumni Board. My co-founder graduated 8 years after I did. So. Okay.
And to what extent did your perception of this need relate to the experiences you had as a member of the Alumni Board?
Quite directly.
Can you share some of those details?
Sure. I can give kind of two stories. So I served on the outreach committee of the Alumni Board. As you know, they're divided into committees. And the outreach committee did a fantastic job of events. And so what I saw was that the primary focus of an outreach committee in Reed's case a couple years ago was to really focus on driving chapter events and bringing people together in the same room. But the fact is there's so many people that don't live in chapter cities, and there just isn't the capacity for me to go to every event, and I don't want to miss out on leveraging my network simply because my schedule doesn't allow it. So I think that was the first thing I saw, was that a number of activities tend to be geared towards in-person events, and if you can't make it, then you miss out on your network. And I think that the second inspiration for Switchboard was during one of those alumni board meetings, I happened to stop by my old dorm room, and I knocked on the door, and I met this vivacious, wonderful freshman named Martha, who was looking for an economics internship. And I had a friend who graduated from Reed the same year that I did, and I put him in touch with Martha, and Martha got that internship. And I think that was one of the most gratifying things that I've ever done as an alumna and volunteer for Reed, was to be able to so directly help someone in need. And so I think it was those two instances, and just the desire to have that sense of really meaningful engagement for Martha and for me, that sort of led to this this development of Switchboard that unfolded over many conversations and about 2 years worth of just observing how we could be of most use and benefit to the community.
Great. And then one final question before we move on to get Mike's perspective on this. As you've thought about this as a business venture and as something that you're going to need to be able to pitch to alumni offices successfully in order for it to be able to grow, how much has your past experience on the Reed Alumni Board and working elsewhere in higher ed shaped the way you've developed the product and approached people about your concept?
You know, I think we've just been so astounded at how successful Switchboard is, and it's successful for a number of reasons. You know, first, current students and young alumni intuitively get it, and so we capture this audience that's most difficult to engage, and we're doing that by helping them meet their needs. And I think second, I think we've been really impressed with and heartened by the intergenerational sharing, and so that's quite surprising. You know, I think there have been people from the class of 1965 that have posted an ask on Switchboard, and that ask has been met by someone in the class of 2005. And so that intergenerational sharing to us is so powerful, and it's something that we see is needed across all sorts of higher education networks. And I think finally, you know, we hear stories of people who check Switchboard every day just to see how they can help their community. And that culture of affinity and giving is invaluable, and we know that it's something that every community, every higher education community wants to leverage. And so that's why we've been able to scale it to other communities like Oberlin and PSU and Willamette, because those are objectives that are shared across the board.
Fantastic. Mara, thank you so much for that overview. And now let's turn to Mike and get his take on all this. So Mike is Director of Parent and Alumni Programs at Reed College, where he has worked since 2001. Prior to assuming the helm at Reed, Mike served as Executive Director of Alumni and Community Relations at his own alma mater, Lewis and Clark College. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Thanks, Andrew.
So Mike, what was your initial reaction when Mara brought this idea to you?
Mara and I actually had a whole bunch of conversations from the time that I first met Mara, and so I can't actually remember the exact moment, because I would actually have to say that I think it's somewhat evolved. Because Mara, if you remember, one of our earlier conversations stemmed from your notion that we got to do more because your classmates were struggling in a tough economy, and that we could do more than what we're currently doing, and so there was kind of a notion of wanting to help from Mara early on. And then I think as her experience came from as she had mentioned, from the alumni board, and saw some other people talking, I think this was working on in her mind, and what we first saw Switchboard isn't what we see now. It was I think the kernel of the idea was the same, but its utility and how it manifests itself are a little bit different. And it's not as if Reed signed on right away when she first pitched an idea. She and her colleagues actually developed something and shared it and did it with students independently of us. And we knew when we saw the students' reaction to the possibilities, or at least I knew, there's something there. And we had to figure out how to create a relationship or not, because there was some element of, there was some idea for a proposal for a while that Switchboard could be, that people could be solely independent and have a fee-based program, right, Mara? Or as register as an individual, as opposed as through the college, as opposed to running it through the college. So it was when I saw her proof of concept and how well it resonated with students, and when she floated the trial balloon by alumni, how conceptually they latched onto it as well, that I thought we've got to figure out a way that we can be a sponsor of this on one hand. And that's from her perspective. From my perspective also, I saw, well, two things. I saw an opportunity for us to be facilitators of relationships and interactions which we couldn't do ourselves. So, you know, I have an alumnus who comes to me and says, you know what, I'm looking for somebody to sublet an extra room in my house. How can I spread the word? And we really we weren't going to use our listserv. We weren't going to post, you know, so all I had was Facebook. Mm-hmm. If somebody wasn't on Facebook, they couldn't do that. So, or somebody was having an art gallery opening, and it just didn't fit into our chapter construct for announcements. And so this was a great way. I thought, wow, we can just direct people to something, to this, and let them do it themselves, and we're merely facilitators of it. And specifically years ago, I'd actually sent an email, a number of emails, to the folks at Craigslist saying, hey, have you ever thought of doing your sort differently instead of being limited by geography, having it by affiliation and looking at colleges? And I got zero response. And I think I got zero response because it didn't fit their model. But what Mara proposed with Switchboard exactly fits what I was trying to do, albeit in a different way, in a much more pretty way, but much more nimble and directed towards alumni, you know, alumni interests, if you will, whether it's housing or advice or whatever it might be. So I can't pinpoint the exact time when I said yeah, we got to do this. It was an evolving conversation. But when and so when the numbers actually came to a point in terms of registrants and interest that said we have to do this, so that's the origin.
Yeah, the way you're talking about serving as facilitators reminds me a lot of something that Andy Shainlin talks about fairly regularly, about how if we can sort of reposition how we think about ourselves to go from being the actual executors of programming to being the conveners. And then you convene the conversations, then you just get out of the way and you let the community take care of itself. And that's a concept that scales in a way that we will simply never be able to scale if we insist on micromanaging everything ourselves. And so listening to how this unfolded, it sounds like you were aware from the get-go that this was something that had the potential to complement a lot of the programming that you and your staff were already doing well, that aligns with broader institutional strategic priorities, right?
Correct.
To what extent do you think, how important was it that you and Mara knew each other in the context of the Reed Alumni Board to be able to start having these exploratory conversations and sort of be generally aware that Switchboard was out there among the students, and then being aware that there was beginning to be interest among the alumni? And that feels very qualitatively different to me than sort of a cold call from an alumni entrepreneur who says, hi, I'm Joe from the class of '87, and I've got this project that's going to change your life. It feels like you had a relationship, and this sort of evolved out of that relationship.
Yeah, but yes, true. but there actually had to be something there. I think, from my perspective, I guess that I sensed that there was a need there, or that what she was proposing matched and dovetailed with what I sensed out there as a need.
Mm-hmm.
So, did it help that I knew Mara? Absolutely. Did it help that we'd had lots of conversations, and I knew about her passions and her capabilities? Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
And at the same time, it was probably helpful that she didn't come to you saying, Mike, I've got this great idea, and I need you to pony up $20,000 for me to do my proof of concept.
No, in fact, I think we actually collaborated for a number of years with essentially them developing their program, and us doing something like providing space at commencement to table, or at various programming. You know, Switchboard had a presence among students, with students, before they ever had a presence with a.
Great, and that makes sense in terms of how you would begin to go about proving your concept, especially because students tend to be pretty eager to play around with stuff like that. But I love the notion of providing encouragement and support in the form of things like space at Reunion, without having the entrepreneur come in looking for seed money right up front. And I only bring that up because I've had that phone conversation. You know, I start getting into the double digits with that particular conversation, and if that's a cold call, that's just a very abrupt way to start talking about something that could potentially benefit both parties. So, were there any other business units on campus or other offices that were interested in Switchboard that have also been supportive? Did you have to negotiate any politics to get higher level attention focused on this?
Well, I think there were two other offices that were involved in sorts of conversations. Our colleagues in then called Career Services, now called the Center for Life Beyond Reed, were initially concerned or thinking that this was I don't want to say a replacement or anything else, that this was not helping their efforts at jobs for students, because they had their own listserv and job announcement profile, and this would replace it, or that this was being positioned as a replacement, or perceived as, maybe that's the right way of thinking about it, perceived as a replacement, and it's not. It's a tool that multiple people can use. And in fact, the focus of Switchboard is more than just jobs. If you looked at Mara's screen, you see a whole bunch of stuff that are beyond jobs. Mm-hmm. But initially, there was a feeling that that's because what students are most interested in, jobs or housing, or jobs, internships or housing, that this was stepping on their turf, if you will. And I don't think, I never perceived it like that. And I think initially that was a sense, but it quickly changed when you could see that, when students saw that this wasn't a replacement and it wasn't competition, it was another way you could get information. Because in reality, our institutional database is not nimble, and it's not very it's not very helpful if you don't exactly know what you want. Right. I'm interested in somebody who can give me advice on, you know, the high-tech world in the Bay Area. Well, you can do a query in our database for people who work in if you know the right things to search for in the Bay Area. But it's even the Bay Area, you've got to look at San Francisco, Berkeley, you know, Menlo Park or whatever, and then you've got to look at a field. But you have no idea if those people have any desire or what they have to offer. And you could throw out a question with Switchboard, and people will respond enthusiastically to your query, right? And so they're a complement to one another. And people had to internally had to understand that. So Then there was the question regarding, the obvious questions regarding, the development office's concern. How does this fit in? What's the relationship with the college? And then those are just conversations to have, and they quickly realized that this is something that benefits everyone. And the only other people involved actually into college haven't been a part of it at Reed necessarily, but have been our colleagues in public affairs, who might want to get community announcements out and have community folks supporting it more widely. But they're more than happy for us to be the sponsors, and we're a small enough shop that I can just go and chat with people pretty easily. It's not terribly stovepipe, though. Everyone has their own areas, but they're in any institution. They're going to be turf battles, and the question is degree. There's going to be miscommunication. It just questions how long it goes. We've been able to overcome all that stuff, and now you see career services mentioning Switchboard all the time, just as one of the tools available to students. You hear our office, you hear public affairs. One of the things that Mara came up with, which was a great slogan, when people have a question like, hey, can you do this? The response is, yeah, switchboard it. Okay. And we use that all the time too. Yeah, just switchboard it.
So it's turned into a verb.
Yeah, well, just post it up there, and we use it all the time on Facebook as a response to queries that come up about something. We say, have you posted this question to Switchboard? And you make a link, and the connection is made.
Great. Well, that's a very good initial overview. And let's now invite Mara back into the conversation, and I'm actually just brimful of all sorts of questions about how this is working out. My first question, I know that oftentimes when advancement shops are thinking about a new tool, having some sort of a connection between that tool and the institutional database is a precondition for any conversations. Has that been an issue as this relationship has evolved? Is there any sort of data pass through? Do you feel like that's important?
What we were seeing was the most valuable information that advancement offices were looking for is an updated email address, and so we're working on, and that capability is possible to do an easy export of updated email addresses, and that's really what they were after. So Reed was so great as a partner because we were able to really get down to what is the most valuable thing they could extract from the data that we were collecting, and the email address was it, and so we were able to quickly solve that, that hurdle. What we were hearing was just that other than that, there really didn't need to be an interdigitation between the two platforms. The Switchboard offers so many opportunities to use it as a discovery tool for potential donors. So all of those people that are offering, what we see is that's just a way of them opening the door to a longer conversation potentially with the development office down the road about ways that they might be able to get involved and continue their participation in time, talent, or treasure. So Switchboard is just a very good tool at surfacing those initial people who are ready to make offers and ready to get more involved, and then the development office can use that information as they wish.
Andrew?
Yep.
Yeah, I got to say that once we got the conversation to a point where internally people realized that this was not a request to tap into the institutional database, things got a lot easier.
Okay.
Because that's the biggest. You get our colleagues over in the computing area involved, and people want to know, how's that data going to work? Are we giving data? What's the upload like? It just gets so much more complicated.
Right.
And this was so much cleaner. Essentially, it's things that exist on a separate server. We have administrative access to it. We're able to monitor. We're able to get information. For us, it's absolutely a win-win.
So it sounds like you distilled the one key piece of information that was sort of the true high-value stuff here, and you figured out how to get that into the hands of the institutional database people, and then you just didn't worry about the rest of the stuff that otherwise would have made this more complicated than it had to be.
Exactly.
Great. I like it. I wish that could be that attitude could be franchised and distributed throughout the country. How about the issue of, so Mara, you talked about this as a discovery tool, and it seems to me that it's not only got potential as a way to identify people who are willing to help read, broadly speaking, but it also seems like Mike, you and your staff could look at the types of conversations that keep coming up over and over again within the Switchboard context, and maybe begin to use that as sort of a heat map, identifying topics or subjects that are of particular interest to the alumni community that you might actually allow to begin to influence your programming as well.
I think you're ahead of us. I'm thinking that we haven't actually had a chance since we've officially launched. We started at the beginning of the school year with the formalized relationship, and we invited the alumni actively to become involved at the beginning of this calendar year. We're going to look at things this summer and figure out how we can further maximize the benefit that's already been evident for us. So I think you're right. I think it's a great comment that we need to look at the nature of the posts and the nature of the offers and try to figure out what can we learn from this as well, and how can we be of, what can we learn? How can we be of assistance?
This also feels like the type of platform where critical mass is going to be absolutely crucial to its long-term prognosis. So I guess question A would be, have both of you thought about some sort of a concerted communications push to try to get more Reed alumni active on Switchboard? And B, do you think, I always feel tension when I think about Facebook communities, in that you can do advertising and try to drive people in there and grow them by paying for the traffic, but then part of me thinks that I want people who take that extra step to self-identify as being interested in the Cornell Alumni Facebook page, for instance. And I feel like I'd rather have a smaller, more highly engaged community than a larger, less highly engaged community. How are you thinking about that issue of growing the user base?
If I can speak to that, one thing that we've always said at Switchboard is there's no difference between students and alumni. And I was actually really surprised that there was such a wall and barrier between student services and alumni affairs. So the special thing about Switchboard is that it's a completely seamless platform. And so we've had really great success with Reed in onboarding freshmen as soon as they start at convocation. And so it isn't as though they have to transfer over to another completely separate and foreign alumni platform when they graduate. It's a tool that they've been using since the first day of their freshman year. So we make really concerted efforts to partner with Reed and do onboarding pushes around commencement and convocation. And so you kind of get them at both ends of being a freshman and a senior, so that when they move on to becoming alumni, they're completely familiar with and have used and have received benefit from and can totally understand the platform. So I would just say that Switchboard completely flattens this notion of a difference between students and alumni, and I think that's what makes it so intuitive. The other thing that I would say is, to us, it's a platform that's there anytime, and it's there for whatever need you might have. So perhaps you use Switchboard to find a summer internship, and then later on you offer your place to stay. And to us, there's no preconditions or expectations of wanting people to use it all the time. And that's what makes it so different from social media, is that the metrics of social media are all about this constant engagement and really kind of hijacking people's time. And to us, we want communities to think of Switchboard as a very high value place that meets their needs when they have them from a community they trust, and they can get on with their lives, and they don't have to be tethered to the social media accounts, in the same way that I think we've seen in alumni affairs engagement.
Let me just talk about, first of all, one thing that was really amazing to us. First of all, through Switchboard's efforts at getting students subscribed, it was just an amazing percentage. And Mara, you're going to have the data at hand because you know it so well, about how many students signed up, are registered with Switchboard. And what's the number?
I can show you, actually, just to give you a sense of it. But yeah, to your point, Mike, 70% of users are under 45 on Switchboard. So it's just a completely intuitive platform for young alumni.
the what we knew though is that if we had to have a large base of other people looking at this as well, or it wouldn't be as meaningful, because the alumni are going to be in a better position to fulfill requests from students than other students, arguably, especially when you look at things like housing or internships. What we were amazed by, I think, was the rapid rate of which our alumni signed up. So within I believe a month to month and a half, over 10% of our alumni body had signed up for Switchboard.
Wow. And was that all across the generations, or was that skewed towards young alumni?
Well, it skews young, but it's not limited to that at all.
Okay. And it feels like that might be a way for older alums to actually deploy the resources they have very directly to help.
Yeah,
their community, right?
One of the things that Mara and I have talked about as being an ongoing challenge is this notion of the challenge of overcoming self-interest. And Mara talked about the altruism and that love. What's going to get you to look at Switchboard every day if you may know people who are in a position, or even of yourself, to respond positively to an ask, but what's going to get you to look at it, right? And that's one of the great things about the RSS feed. It pushes that out there. But we also know we have to get more eyes looking at it. We've got to do that. And so we actually have a group of super users, alumni board people who are committed to reading this on a regular basis and trying to go out there and extend their network and reach out to people who may not be aware of the post, of the offer or the ask, to make a connection. And I think that's been important for us.
So that sounds like that's a full-on legitimate online volunteering role that has emerged as a result of the emergence of this platform.
Well, they actually had a face-to-face meeting as super users at reunions this last week.
Nice.
Mara, you were showing some data, right?
Data, yeah. I mean, I'll screen share.
All right, let me move the camera over to you.
So this is the administrative dashboard is on Switchboard, and I'll just briefly show you the stats. So you can see the number of asks and offers, the types of information that people are posting about, new users by day, new users by affiliation. And then here you can see quite clearly, just how much valuable of a tool it is for people in this class year spread. So, the other thing I wanted to point out, this is the board that Mike was sort of talking about, where we give credit to those community builders that are the most active users and people that are on the alumni board that are really, or volunteers that are just really helping to drive this community platform. And we wanted to reward community builders, which just doesn't happen in the same way on existing social media. And I think the last thing that I want to point out, this is the success feed. So essentially, I'm sure that success post that I originally spoke of for that hosting experience that I had, all of those success stories are pulled and aggregated into the success feed, and that's just prime content for public relations and communications to be able to feature those stories in newsletters and in the magazine. We wanted to make their jobs easier for surfacing really positive interactions. But I just want to briefly point out that, oftentimes I think there's this notion of volume, that we have to constantly be focusing on quantity, and that we need this frenzied amount of quantity. But you'll see, for example, Simon, he's one of my favorite alums. He actually does the casting for Portlandia.
Okay.
And so he posted that he was looking for a casting assistant. He cast Portlandia and looking for an assistant. He got over 500 views on that post, which you can see here. And then he went back and commented and posted a success story. They met many great candidates, and they've already put one to work. And I think that is what we're getting at here, that Simon putting one alum or student to work is really what matters, that he's had a very positive experience with the Read Network, that alum or student, I'm sure, is over the moon to be working with the casting director of Portlandia. And so it isn't about, how many casting assistants can Simon hire all at once. It's and how can we give him the most high-value interaction possible from this platform where he has that one incredibly meaningful engagement.
I like that. Yeah, I used to work in admissions, and we had sort of a saying in the office that if you mishandled interactions with one potential applicant, big picture, you got 20,000 applications, that's an infinitesimal problem, but for that particular individual, that's a 100% error rate.
Right.
And it feels like this is a situation where, in Simon's case, that's a 100% success rate because he was able to have that extremely positive experience that was valuable enough that he's willing to actually come back and share it. I would also think that those sorts of success stories would be pretty essential to persuading other people to come and join the platform. And I bring that up in response to a comment that was posted on Twitter by Kristen Simonetti, who was just saying that intergenerational involvement seems critical. How do you get older alums involved? It seems like these sorts of success stories are potentially a very effective way of getting people actually involved.
Yeah, I mean, and to two of those points, first, I'm glad you brought up the admissions office because we've heard anecdotally from the admissions staff that students will see that Reed has a switchboard, and that can sometimes be the decision, that helps them make their decision in going to Reed because they see what a high-value network results from the investment in their education. So I just wanted to mention that it has a role at admissions also and is being touted as a really powerful tool. And to the older alumni issue, I think we're so excited to pursue that opportunity. And what we found is just a really low-hanging fruit is those email alerts where they just deliver the information directly into their inbox. And it's a great way of facilitating those connections. So I think, and Mike's office is especially so well positioned to spread the word among older alumni because that tends to be the relationships. That they've built those relationships over time with those older alumni, and so Mike can personally say to that person from the class in the 60s or 70s, hey, there's this new tool, and leverage them in that way.
Right. We just haven't yet. It's been new enough that we haven't had a chance to do things that we're planning on doing, which is actually making sure that Switchboard has a presence at our chapter events. For instance, we've been talking about taking our student manager on the road, Kauri, to share because she's just a great showcase of it's kind of like the hair club, right? She actually had a successful experience, and she's a great proselytizer of Switchboard, and obviously how much alumni love connecting with students, and when you see that you're helping students, you feel good, you feel better about it, and so we'll be growing. I feel confident that we will be able to grow our alumni Switchboard users over time. We just haven't had a chance to focus on it, but we will starting this summer.
So we are 8 minutes from the end of the show, and I have two questions that I would like to conclude with. The first has to do with product roadmap. As you think about where Switchboard is going to go, what sorts of things do you see on the horizon, and are you sort of talking together about those things?
Mara, you want to talk about one? Obviously, one of the things that we're set. It's important to us is connecting the dots. Mara alluded to it, which is hoping that alumni or that the members of the community who receive benefit from a Switchboard connection will remember the facilitators fondly in their philanthropy. Mara is working hard to create a system within Switchboard to facilitate that, right? And so I'll tee that over to you, Mara.
Yeah, so we often describe Switchboard as rolling out in two phases. The first is just build this really high-value community, which is what we've shown today at Reed. And so you do that with no expectation from your community because the point is you are, as I mentioned at the beginning, you're facilitating a way for people to connect and meet their needs, and it's just a very high-value community, and we want that to be as apparent as possible. And I think in the coming years there are really exciting opportunities to build in, donation a donation portal, we're hearing from our users that they want to be able to donate as easily to read as they're able to post on Switchboard. They want that transaction to feel as fast and seamless as possible. And so in the coming years, I think we'll explore that. But as you know, it's so important for us first to see that community really thriving and become such an essential part of the READ community that when the time comes that we potentially integrate a donation portal, it's completely intuitive why we're doing that. And it doesn't suddenly feel like you're slathering a donate button all over something, which is often where we see some software products start, is with the donation button. And we're completely flipping that model on its head and saying, first, let the community give back to each other, and then they will be so much more inclined to give. So the institutions that we've partnered with are very forward-thinking and innovative, and they understand that first you have to lay that foundation if you're ultimately going to drive the ball to that touchdown of the goal of philanthropy.
It feels to me like there might be some natural affinity there with a more crowdfunding type model of philanthropy, where you're positioning the community to members of the community to ask each other to help make something happen, but in a very project-based way, which may or may not relate to things that are actually happening on campus. But it feels like that fits in with the offer and ask model slightly more tidily than more general unrestricted appeals might.
Yep, and you can also start to correlate the behaviors, right? So I think we're excited to explore with the development office the possibility of having a matching grant. All of us are familiar with those matching fundraising drives, but instead of matching dollar to match dollar to offer or ask. So what would it look like to have someone put up a matching pledge that's trying to drive behavior and engagement on Switchboard, and that's the metric they're most concerned with, instead of just having that $10,000 check matched in some way. And that, we think, can create so much more value for the community. If one of those asks or offers results in a job for a student, or any number of other things, that value is just magnified and it circulates throughout the community over a lifetime.
Great. All right, last question. I'd like to ask you each to, it sounds to me, hearing each of you talk about Switchboard and talk about working with each other, that this feels like a genuine, positive, and authentic partnership to me. Could I ask each of you to share maybe 1 or 2 points of advice that you might share, Mara, with an entrepreneur, and Mike, an alumni affairs officer, thinking about this sort of partnership? What do you think are good attitudes or practices to bring to the table to make something like this work as effectively as it seems to be working in the case of Switchboard and READ?
What do you want to answer first?
Well, how about each of you speak from, Mike, what would you say to a fellow alumni relations professional who's trying to craft a positive relationship with an alumni entrepreneur?
Well, I guess first of all, one of the, I think in your opening you talked about, some people have a philosophy like you're not going to do business with an alumnus, right? That's just against our policy. We just don't do that. I just like to challenge people to rethink that, because the reality is you do business with people all the time. You take money at reunions, and that's doing business with them, right? I mean, people do this all the time, you're closing yourselves off from some real value-added elements. If somebody has a good product and they're an alumnus or an alumna, you're going to have this multi-layered opportunity for a story, for being part of a success, for having their passion and energy and caring for their product. Their pride is in this as well. And I think it's important to be mindful of the bottom line and the costs and those things, to make sure that products are delivered and their quality and all those things. That goes without saying. But the benefit of having a relationship with an alumnus that is fruitful and positive is just tremendous. And I think you have to do due diligence and all those good things you have to do. Just because an alumnus comes to you doesn't mean they get a free pass, right? Or a fast track. But what you have as an opportunity, I think is tremendous.
Great. And Mara, how does this look from where you sit?
You know, Switchboard was developed over 10 years of conversations and observations, and I think the one thing I would say for any entrepreneur is it has to come from something like that where you really ask yourself, how is my product helping this community, and how is it making someone like Mike's life easier? And the products that do that and do it well and do it authentically, they shine through. You know, so I know that people like you are constantly hit up with different software products and options, and I can only imagine how overwhelming it is. But at the end of the day, I think a partnership like this is really special because it was born from such an authentic desire to really improve the lives of so many people, and an institution that we just care about very deeply. So we're excited to share that that solution with other campuses as we're doing.
Couldn't agree more, and I think this is a situation where clearly if the relationship is right, together you can accomplish things that neither would be able to accomplish independently. And with that hallmark moment, I will draw this show to a close. Mike and Mara, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
And now we have come to the end of our hour. My co-host, Ryan Catherwood, will be back in 2 weeks with another great show. He's going to be doing a debrief on reunion season with guests from Colgate, Texas, Indiana, Swarthmore, and Williams. And once again, thank you to our sponsors, iModules and M Stoner. As always, you can watch more shows from Advancement Pros on the Advancement Live archive located at higheredlive.com. Thanks to everyone who turned in live, and see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.